We're going to pick up now in Haskell's book, well, not his book, a book about him, starting on page 53. We left off at a breaking point. For over 4 months, Elder Haskell had been preparing to fulfill an assignment given him at the GC session in December of the previous year. He had been asked to visit the various missions in Europe. G.I. Butler, General Conference President, felt that it was important to have one of the leading brethren become acquainted with conditions in Europe in order to cooperate to the best advantage with the fellow workers overseas. Elder Haskell left for his mission tour as soon as he was satisfied that the school was well started and that provision had been made for its successful continuance. Before sailing, he had the satisfaction of seeing the student enrollment more than double. And when he returned after an absence of 6 months, he found that the school had outgrown its shop chapel schoolhouse and had been moved into the 2-room unfinished basement of the church building. Do you remember what school that was? I believe that was the school in South Lancaster, Massachusetts, and they started small. And our work for God can start small, but he will bless it. Going on in the book, Rowena Purdon, a pioneer Lancastrian from South Lancaster, of course, described these quarters, quote, "The stones of the foundation formed the side walls. The ceilings were the timbers of the floor above, and Mother Earth made a silent floor for noisy feet. A wood furnace stood in one corner, and kerosene lamps supplied light." On his return from overseas, Haskell wrote, quote, "We found the school at this place prospering finely. Everything seemed to be moving like clockwork, and perfect harmony prevailed among the students. A woody yard had been opened in the interest of the school. The students labored 3 hours per day, and by this means they had in some instances been enabled to nearly pay their board. There has been an outside sale of wood during the last 2 weeks of over $100 worth. The land cultivated by them last term has yielded a profit of about $60, which had contributed to the school. The housework is performed by the lady students. A good religious interest already exists among the students, and 9 have been baptized. Thanksgiving Day, November 29, 1883, was a memorable day, in the South Lancaster Church. Mrs. White was present and gave an earnest address in which she reminded her hearers that the real purpose of Thanksgiving Day was to recall God's blessings and his mercies and favors with thankful hearts. She was followed by Haskell, Robinson, and other faculty members with appeals for gifts of money with which to purchase land and erect school buildings. To these appeals she added her own stirring words, quote, "When I remember how forward our brethren in New England have been to respond to every appeal for means for our missions and the various enterprises connected with present truth," just a moment here, please. Okay. Connected with present truth, even calls coming from the Pacific coast, I feel very anxious that now, when the cause in New England is in great need, the brethren in other sections may reciprocate their liberality. Many testimonies were offered, each one accompanied by the reading of Thanksgiving scriptures. Within a little more than 30 minutes, the amount of $12,500 was raised, and soon afterward, the school experienced a second expansion. Mrs. White wrote that the brethren agreed that this day was the best Thanksgiving Day they had ever experienced. The meeting closed about 2 o'clock. We then took ample refreshments, she said. The first building was erected the next year, 1884. As the school grew, South Lancaster's industrial departments were enlarged and strengthened. New industries were added. These included tent making, printing, harness and broom making, cobbling, carpentry, dressmaking, and the household arts. An 8-page monthly, The True Educator, was run off the school press. It was devoted largely to methods of education, emphasizing particularly the importance of combining physical and mental labor. Elder Haskell, Mrs. White, Professor Bell, and D.A. Robinson were its chief contributors, though typesetting, proofreading, and press work were done by the students. Now that the school was well established, Professor Bell resumed his position of special responsibility in Battle Creek College, but apparently not until he had secured the services of Mrs. Sarah J. Hall, a young teacher whom he personally had trained to head the English department at South Lancaster. Pardon me, D.A. Robinson was appointed principal, and the faculty was enlarged. The third denominational school to be established had outgrown its infancy and was considered worthy of a name, South Lancaster Academy. Later, its alumni would speak proudly of Atlantic Union College. My husband attended South Lancaster Academy, and I think even Atlantic Union College later. So, and I had a relative teach there. So it's nice to read about how it all started. We're in a new chapter now. Elder Haskell sailed for England from New York on May 7, 1882, on the Persian Monarch, a cargo vessel that also carried a few passengers. Awaiting his arrival in Southampton was an Adventist, J.W. Gardner, who had been appointed as his European guide and interpreter. Gardner had traveled in northern and central Europe and was somewhat familiar with the customs and languages in the areas. In England, the mission family gave Elder Haskell a warm welcome. After a satisfying meal and a look around, he was ready to sit down and listen as the workers related experiences connected with the beginning of the proclamation of the message in Britain. The first SDA worker there was William Ings, a, a Britisher who had lived in the United States and had gone to help in our infant publishing work in Switzerland, then had returned to his homeland. He began house-to-house work in Southampton, talking and praying with the people and taking subscriptions for periodicals. God blessed his efforts. At the end of the first 16 weeks, he reported 10 persons keeping the Sabbath of the Lord. He also visited many ships anchored in the harbor, talked with the sailors and passengers, and handed out literature. Late that year, the General Conference sent J. N. Loughborough to begin public evangelism. His first address in Southampton was delivered on July 5, 1879, in Shirley Hall to an audience of 150 people. That spring, a tent was erected in a suburb of the city, and another series of Bible lessons or lectures was given. Maud Sisley soon arrived from America to assist him. She was already successful as a colporteur and a house-to-house evangelistic worker of the type that later came to be called a Bible worker. Now a Bible instructor, Loughborough gave 74 discourses before the weather became so foggy and rainy that the tent had to be abandoned. A large dwelling, Ravenswood, was leased to serve as headquarters. By 1882, many lights were kindled in other cities. Reinforcements had come from America. At that time, A. John was conducting a series of lectures in the Hall of Science in Grimsby, Lincolnshire, and also holding open-air meetings and distributing literature in and about the city. The missionary family in England were of good courage. As they talked with Haskell about the new Sabbath keepers, who were so earnest in their efforts to interest relatives and friends in the grand Bible truths that they had recently discovered. These new converts were busy selling journals and lending tracts. Others, by their godly lives and Christian ministry, were bearing witness to the truth in a quiet way. There were businessmen who merely by closing their shops on Sabbath were awakening a spirit of inquiry into the Adventist teachings. Some churches were suffering persecution, but this served only to increase interest in the message. The father of the tract and missionary societies, i.e. Haskell, was thrilled when told of the large amount of literature being distributed since the organization of the National Tract Society of England, and more thrilled when he held in his hand a sheet printed on their own press. That small paper was being sent out as a supplement to the signs, but would soon be known as Present Truth. In the editorial office, he met Jenny Thayer, whom he had known in South Lancaster. He learned that hundreds of packages of tracts were placed by ship missionaries on vessels leaving England for distant ports. Missionaries crossing the Atlantic talked with ship captains and officers and won their cooperation in carrying literature free of charge to various ports. Many tracts were being distributed among the thousands of Scandinavian and other immigrants aboard ships en route to new homes in the New World. As far as possible, this literature was given them in their own language, that they might be able to read it during their long voyage and talk with one another regarding the truths in the pages. Haskell wrote home to the review, "The judgment alone will reveal the full results of the ship work. Vessels leaving Southampton have carried our publication to all parts of the world. Many packages have been taken to ports in Africa and other countries and have been sent to the interior by those who are interested in missionary work." He stated that he believed God was raising up men and women who did not yet have full knowledge of Bible truth to scatter the message, i.e. these captains and other officers who were willing They didn't know the truth, my words, of course, but they were used of God to scatter the truth. Going on, Haskell and Gardner were planning to attend a conference in Tramelan, Switzerland, in September. Desiring to visit Seventh-day Adventist churches on the continent, they left England in June. We're back to our story, and even though we're lacking a page, this book is deficit in this particular page. We're going to press on and read the next page, and I'll give you a summary of what we've missed next time. So here we go. While at Torrey Palace, the traveling brethren visited nearby caves in which the Vaudois, the Waldensians, had hidden during times of persecution. At one of these caves, the climbers laid aside their coats and heavy garments, and as they continued the exploration, they removed their shoes and socks to enable them to cling more firmly to rocks along the narrow passageways. Elder Haskell took one brief look at the entrance. Then, with a vigorous shake of his head, he refused to subject his large proportions to the risk of being trapped inside. Gardner, a smaller man, took the risk and went inside. In that dark, tortuous cavern, the forefathers of their guide had hidden from their persecutors. The local people told of the days when their ancestors had been hunted like wild beasts, put to the sword, burned at the stake, tortured, and confined in loathsome dungeons for no greater crime than owning and reading a book containing the teachings of Jesus and his apostles and prophets. Experiences related under these circumstances took on new reality and vividness. Their present inconveniences seemed, by comparison, to shrink into nothingness. The 3-day conference at Tramelan, September 8 through 11, was fully occupied by reports of progress from the widely scattered missions and by consideration of plans for the advancement of the message. A few of the brief interludes between meetings were filled with recitals of experiences in connection with the entrance of the message into Central Europe. The two American brethren enjoyed hearing the story of the first Seventh-day Adventist church in Europe, of their search for light, and of their joy on learning that there was an organized body of Christians on the other side of the world who believed and practiced the Bible truths they had accepted. Elder Haskell doubtless told them of Mrs. White's vision in which she had seen groups of people scattered over the earth, searching the scriptures and looking wistfully to heaven and praying for light. At this conference, Elder Haskell's earnest appeals for all lay members to take an active part in tract and missionary work and to sustain it with their means brought a quick response. The experiences, he told, awakened firm confidence in the literature ministry as a fruitful means of missionary endeavor. At the close of the conference, a larger gathering of workers was convened at Basel for the purpose of unifying the scattered European missions and discussing methods of evangelism. This gathering was afterward known as the first session of the European Council of Seventh-day Adventists. In his travels, Haskell noted the substantial progress made in the printing and circulation of publications in several languages. Tracts needed by evangelists were being translated into the language of the area, and the money raised locally for their publication The journal Les Signes du Temps, that's the French, the signs of the times, but it's in French, published, yes, here we go, in the French language, was carrying a knowledge of present truth into nearly every country of Central Europe. It bore a clear, outspoken testimony to the Sabbath, the law of God, the coming of Jesus, immortality only through Christ, gospel temperance, and other important Bible truths. A few tracts had been translated into Arabic. The Danish-Norwegian paper Advent Tindi, first issued in 1872, edited by J.G. Madison, and now printed in Battle Creek, was being widely circulated. Thousands of copies were sent to relatives and friends in the old country by Scandinavian people who had settled in the United States. During the 6 months or more that Haskell spent in Europe, he visited nearly every country into which the message had found entrance. The various conferences and council sessions held while he was there created a closer unity among the widely scattered missions. His earnest appeals and wise counsel inspired workers and lay members alike with fresh energy and zeal. As he prayed with him, his faith in God's leadership, his bright picture of future advance, inspired faith and courage. His practical business ability and his experience in conducting important enterprises with small financial resources and few helpers all combined to light their way through many perplexing situations and to point them on to success. Haskell's heart was warmed by the courage and loving fellowship of the converts, by their joyful enthusiasm in persuading others to investigate facts of faith which they had found substantial and trustworthy. More than ever impressed with the value of literature evangelism, he strongly advocated local publication of reading material in the various European languages. He drew up plans for the establishment of a mission center in London and for the removal of the publishing plant from Grimsby to London. While in Basel, he rented a building that contained a good-sized hall suitable for public meetings. Soon after his departure, the mission family moved in, and Elder Erzberger delivered a course of Bible lectures, which resulted in the addition of new believers to the church. The 2 years that followed Haskell's visit witnessed a great forward movement. Periodicals and tracts in the various languages of Europe followed in ever-increasing number. In Basel, the Imprimerie Polyglotte, or the many-language printing office, was established and became the chief publishing center in Europe. The Christiana House also added new books, tracts, and periodicals. As soon as literature was available, tract societies were organized and colporteurs trained. When mission funds were insufficient, ministers and members often financed a publication themselves. When the time came for Elder Haskell to return to the homeland, a letter preceded him expressing the sincere appreciation of the European churches for the willingness of the American brethren to spare one of their leading men to come to their assistance. On his return to South Lancaster, Haskell's first interest was the school. Then, toward the end of the year, came the General Conference session. at which he reported on his European journey and the work overseas. The following spring found him in California, for he was also president of the California Conference as well as the New England Conference. At a camp meeting near Lemoore, California, occurred an incident that proved to be a turning point in the method of evangelism that affected the whole denomination. He had been perplexed regarding certain counsel recently given him by Sister White. As the story is told, he looked up his longtime friend W.C. White and said, "Willie, I want you to come and pray with me. Several times your mother has told me that I should do less preaching and more teaching. I don't understand exactly what that involves." The two went into a nearby grain field and prayed together, pleading God's promises to give wisdom to all who ask in faith. Then came a rainy day. During a heavy downpour, the drumming of rain on the tent roof drowned out the sound of Elder Haskell's voice. The people crowded into the center of the tent to avoid the splattering rain. Not wishing to lose time, Elder Haskell took his stand by the center pole and began asking questions and giving out scripture texts to be read in answer to the questions. The rain continued. Elder Haskell continued also, asking questions and giving out texts. Interest ran high. Scarcely anyone left until the dinner bell rang at 1 o'clock. Some of the brethren passed Mrs. White's tent. She called to them and asked what had been going on in the big tent. When they told her, she said, "That's what Elder Haskell should do. This is the way the people should be instructed." She later told him that what he had done was in harmony with the light she had received. She related having seen in vision many young people going from house to house with Bibles under their arms, teaching truth in a quiet way. The 1883 General Conference session recommended this question and answer method of teaching and arranged for the publication of the Bible Reading Gazette, eventually replaced by a book, Bible Readings for the Home Circle, translated into many languages and issued in many editions. The Bible reading method was taken up immediately by colporteurs in meeting customers' questions. The following autumn, Haskell was asked to teach this method in a 10-day Bible Reading Institute preceding the GC session at Battle Creek. Courses in the method were offered at Healdsburg College and later at South Lancaster Academy. Thus, Haskell became an apostle not only of house-to-house distribution of the printed page, but also of house-to-house personal evangelism through Bible studies. The Bible reading method, though not new, now first became a major development in evangelism, and Bible reading workers, now called Bible instructors, were recruited from the lay members. Beginning also in 1883, a number of city missions were opened in New York and other large cities, not as the term is usually understood, welfare missions for down and out, but for runners of the modern evangelistic center. In other words, not as a mission for the down and out person, but as an evangelistic center. I probably didn't read with the right emphasis. Haskell was one of the chief promoters of these and wrote many articles on the subject in the Review. The International Tract and Missionary Society, of which he was the president, sponsored some of these and furnished publications for their use. The mission provided living quarters for the workers and a center for colporteur evangelism, Bible studies, and small public meetings, and it served to train lay workers. Some city missions had reading rooms, others had lecture halls, and in coastal cities, ship mission work was included. Wherever a nucleus of converts was gathered, a church was organized. The typical Seventh-day Adventist city mission of the 1880s conducted a school for the special training of house-to-house Bible instructors. It was launched with the hope that it would cost the conference little or nothing. Every member of the team was expected to earn his share of the living expenses by selling books and periodicals, which would be a means of awakening an interest in the message they had come to bring. By economy and careful planning, the cost of running the home must be kept at a minimum. Church members were asked to send contributions of fruits, vegetables, and other foods. However, these missions rarely proved self-supporting. At the 1889 General Conference session, it was recommended that the name City Mission be dropped, since it was misunderstood by the public, and that such missions become canvassing stations with Bible instructors working along with the colporteurs. The training of Bible instructors was to be centered in the Chicago Bible School. During the 1890s, many city missions, or welfare missions, were operated for the poor. 20 years after the evangelistic missions had begun in the 1880s, Haskell had the opportunity to conduct such missions, which he called Bible training schools, in New York and other cities, and to demonstrate the operation of these on a self-supporting basis. See the chapter on New York City missions. Okay, so that ends that chapter. Now we're moving to Australia. More than 10 years had passed since Elder Haskell heard Mrs. White relate her vision of the printing presses, in which Australia had been specifically mentioned. He had never relinquished his desire to pioneer the work in that specially designed mission field. A similar desire was cherished by John O. Corliss, who had also heard the vision related. At last, their dream came true. On May 10, 1885, a party of missionaries sailed from San Francisco on a 7,000-mile voyage across the Pacific, bound for the land down under. Stephen Haskell, director of the Enterprise, was accompanied by John O. Corliss, his wife, and 2 children, also M.C. Israel and family. 2 young men, Henry Scott, a printer, and William Arnold, an experienced colporteur, completed the group. 7 days voyaging brought them to Honolulu. The steamer, a freighter, arrived a little after midnight and cast anchor, and passengers who so desired were taken ashore. The arrival of the missionaries was entirely unexpected. Because of the threat of war between England and Russia, it was supposed that the steamer would not dock. Glancing around in the darkness and seeing no one at the wharf to greet them, Haskell hired a carriage to take him and his companion ministers to the International Tract and Missionary Rooms. They found two laymen, Abram LaRue and another colporteur named Scott, who were engaged in missionary operations on the island. By the light of a kerosene lamp, they enjoyed a 3-hour visit before the ship's siren gave the all aboard signal. The two visitors were greatly interested to learn of the activities of the visitors, not two visitors. The visitors were greatly interested to learn of the activities of these two lone workers who distributed literature from door to door, handing it out to any interested persons they met, both on land and on board vessels anchored in the harbor. They had also opened a free reading room to further scatter seeds of truth, and at the same time were supporting themselves by colporteuring. 13 persons had embraced present truth. They had also learned of individuals and groups on surrounding islands who were investigating and beginning to practice the truths found in printed messages sent through the mails or dropped ashore by passing ships. In Samoa, the travelers found thriving Christian missions, but no Seventh-day Adventists. The London Bible Society had furnished Bibles to the islanders whether they could read or not, and their teachers had taught them all to carry their Bibles to church with them. The voyage was restful to the worn and weary workers. Elder Haskell was in special need of relaxation, for his continual travels and incessant toil of the past years, often with poor food and exposure to all kinds of weather, had resulted in physical exhaustion. Only a few weeks before, while he was giving a Sabbath discourse, his strength had failed, and he had been forced to sit down and let another take his place in the pulpit. But after a few days' rest and treatment at the Battle Creek Sanitarium, the intrepid warrior was on his feet again and ready to launch out on the Australian mission. Some time before leaving America, he had acquired a typewriter. This he took with him, and from then on it became his constant traveling companion. It served him well and faithfully on this voyage. A few sentences from a typed letter to the review readers will give some idea of his interests during the voyage. Quote, "We are privileged to see some things in nature that we have read of but never expected to see. The Southern Cross is in full view each night. We have the most pleasant evenings ever witnessed. The soft, balmy air and the quiet, gentle breeze felt on the hurricane deck are delightful. The North Star, which has guided so many oppressed fugitives from the land of bondage, is not to be seen." End quote. As they were borne forward over the vast ocean, with nothing in sight except blue above and blue beneath, they were led to sense their own littleness and their dependence upon God's care and protection. He was with them on the ship. He would always be with them to guide, instruct, and strengthen as they endeavored to open up a new center of light and blessing in a dark world. Haskell wrote of soul-inspiring interviews with fellow passengers and of religious services conducted by Elder Corliss in response to requests of the passengers. When nearing Australia, he wrote, "Our last letter was mailed at the Samoan Islands. Since then, we have crossed the day line and had the experience of losing a day in the Pacific Ocean. But it so happened there was no time lost. We reached the 180th meridian at the close of the Sabbath, May 28. Pardon me. So the proper day to drop from the calendar was Sunday, May 29. Thus, according to the argument made by our opponents against the Sabbath, there is no more Sunday to be kept. Sabbath was May 30. The error may be in his counting backward 7 days from June 6 across the date line to May 29, then correcting to 28 in the wrong direction instead of to 30. And I hope you understood that. I could read it again, but I don't think it will make it any clearer. But here we will go on. We have continued to cast out our bread upon the waters by distributing reading material among the passengers and preparing Bible readings, which with tracts were placed in empty beer and wine bottles and thrown overboard at points where we had reason to believe they would be washed ashore or picked up by boatmen. On Monday, June 1, at 5 p.m., the ship anchored at Auckland, New Zealand. The vessel remained at anchor 4 hours, and the party visited the city and made inquiries about the people and the country. On the morning of June 6, after a voyage of almost 4 weeks, the steamer entered the harbor of Sydney, New South Wales, Australia. That evening, after the Sabbath, wrote Elder Haskell, they went to a telegraph office and asked when a dispatch would arrive in Massachusetts, USA, and were told today, about this time. The message would have to travel westward, be relayed across Asia, Europe, and the Atlantic cable, and by that time it would be about the same hour in Massachusetts as it had been in Sydney when the message was sent. Haskell and Israel remained to investigate conditions in Sydney, while Corliss and the rest of the party proceeded by coastal steamers south to Victoria to look around in the vicinity of Melbourne. After visiting the Free Public Library, Haskell wrote, "We found 13 of our principal bound books in their catalog. The library has 60,000 volumes, and during 1884 it had 155,000 readers. In the sailor's home, we found a small library, but on the table were 6 of our pamphlets, all much soiled by use. On the front page of each was stamped the following: from the International Tract and Missionary Society, and then the address, and for the sailor's home had been stamped on them. It was like meeting old friends. After spending a week investigating Sydney and its surrounding area, the 2 men went on to join the others of their company who had preceded them to Victoria. Could we have followed the traveler on those first days while he walked about the wide, stone-paved streets of Melbourne, we doubtless would have noticed a look of satisfaction on his face as he viewed the city's thriving places of business its comfortable, well-built homes surrounded by exotic shrubs and flowers, and its magnificent government buildings. Perhaps we might even have noticed an amused smile as he recalled a remark made by an American friend to whom he had, before leaving home, expressed pleasure on being included in the pioneer missionary group to Australia. The man had asked, "Do you want to go down there and convert those kangaroos?" "We did not know anything about Australia," said Haskell. "We did not think of the English cities there, with nearly 500,000 English-speaking people in each." Okay, well, it's time to close with prayer. So if you're willing, or able, I should say, will you kneel with me as we pray, please? Father, we thank you for your great love to us. We thank you for the increase in knowledge and men running to and fro, especially in the book of Daniel, trying to understand. Please, Father, give those that we are concerned about, especially, a hungering and a thirsting for truth, and help us to share literature with them like others do and have done since this birth of the missionary society. So, Father, please give us the abilities and the desire to share our faith. And we do pray for those around us who are hardened in this world and in the ways of the world. Soften their hearts. Speak to their hearts, we ask. While there's yet time, may they turn around and see you face to face, is our prayer. And I thank you. Please keep us safe until we meet again. Bless each one with your spirit, with the protection of your angels, and carry us through to the coming Sabbath, I ask. In Jesus' name, amen. And thank you again for being patient through the loss of the internet. I hope it's come through to those there. I have no way of knowing, but may God bless you and keep you. And bye for now.